initial interests in all things weird develop? What was sort of the early exposure? Because for me, it was reruns of In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. It was Unsolved Mysteries. It was reading books like the Von Daniken stuff. So how about for you?
Well, similar for me, although we didn't have some of those shows here in New Zealand. We had other shows of a similar ilk, Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. And right from an early age, I had a fascination with the weird. And even from an early age, I used to look at children's books that talked about ghosts, UFOs, monsters, particularly monsters, because I felt like, what if there were things out there that we didn't know about? And obviously, as a kid, one of the early examples of that is the Loch Ness Monster. And so I got a book, an Usborne book on monsters. And I don't know if those are still in print, but I know they did some various paranormal subject matters. That I believe they did UFOs as well. But I had the monster one from an early age, and I loved just the crossover between truth and fiction, the kind of the meshing of the two, and the blur. That's the word I'm looking for. The blur between, what is real or what could be real and the unknown. And that really fascinated me, because from an early age, I'm like, okay, so we haven't completed this puzzle called Earth. There's still adventure to be had. There's still mysteries to be solved. And all of a sudden, I felt like I could do that. Of course, then life gets ahead of you and you do what you do and you find what you're good at. And but I still had that thing in the back of my head the whole time where, wouldn't it be great to solve these mysteries? And I love stories. I'm a creative writer and a storyteller myself. So as an artist, I guess that part of my brain, that imagination, has always been very, very strong. So that really helps when you're into this phenomena. Once I sort of got my feet in my career and knew what I was doing, which really did take a while, and through all of that, being funny and being a comedian, which I didn't know at the start was going to be where things really where the money was really going to come in with, especially in New Zealand. It's not really an option, kind of is now, but back then, yeah. So then later on, as an actor, it all just fell into place. Now I can spend my spare time, whatever that is, to turn this little obsession on the back of my head into a hobby.
When you did, sort of make your footprint as an actor and as a comedian, and you're moving about some of the entertainment industry arenas at a party, whatever, did it come up like that you were interested in this, and were you open about your interest in UFOs and cryptids and things like that, or was there still sort of this kind of threshold where you're like, and I'm just not going to go there because this scene is not ready for it, or maybe this might cost me a job, or I'm going to get weird looks and be the UFO Kiwi actor guy.
Yeah.
How did you navigate all of that?
Well, look, going back to getting older, getting more confident into my 30s, to my 40 age, it's at the peak of what's going on with my acting and Hollywood and stuff, being in shows. I was already known as the weird Kiwi comedian, which helped. So it wasn't a great stretch to realize that I'm probably into the unknown. And I let it be obvious during television show records, sitting in green rooms, in comic clubs, comedy clubs, I should say, and comic clubs. It was kind of like, oh yeah, of course he's into that. And I was surprised, particularly with actors, that you'd get a lot of interest, probably a 50% on cast members on who were sort of whose ears would prick up and go, oh, yeah, I'm actually into that stuff. Or, yeah, I've got a story for you. Or, you think Bigfoot's real, right? Well, how about this? My cousin saw this. And so, yeah, if anything, I like to think that I sort of helped any stigma that might be attached to that kind of subject matter melt away a little bit in the social environments of entertainers, because let's face it, a lot of entertainers, especially comics, have big imaginations and are willing to take risks and go further with their ideas, because they're not afraid to get ridiculed. I mean, we get ridiculed our whole lives. I mean, I for one was always the class clown. I was always caught doing something that wasn't really schoolwork, and I would make a joke and make light of everything. It kind of made sense for a lot of people when they heard me regale them with my my UFO stories.
Did you ever find yourself in a situation where, I don't, like for instance, I forget where it actually fit in the timeline, but at one point Jermaine Clement was doing the Men in Black movie, and then eventually you did the X-Files episode. Did you ever want to kind of strut your stuff a little bit and be like, well, by the way, Chris Carter, who I know is pretty well read on this topic, or Jermaine, here's the thing that you need to know about supposed MIBs or aliens, even though I know in the X-Files episode you were aware person, but did you ever kind of strut your stuff a little bit?
Well, I always kept quiet when it came to the authority of entertainment, because I'm very, I feel blessed to get the jobs I get, and I wonder where they come from. I wonder, honestly, whether it's the universe, whether it's the stars aligning, giving me jobs like the X-Files, for example, which was just fell on my lap. I mean, I was very jealous of Jermaine getting MIB, obviously, and we would chat about that. He has always been a skeptic when it comes to pretty much anything paranormal. Certainly the Bigfoot stuff. Certainly, yeah, the cryptid world. Haven't spoken to him too much about ETs and things, but he's pretty grounded. But he loves the fact that I'm into it. His son, actually, Jermaine's son, Soph, is really into stuff. I mean, he's 10, but he's really into his cryptids. In fact, he's been sending me videos of Lego cryptid scenes that he's been making. Going back to Chris Carter, yeah, and Darren Morgan, getting that role, I was just sort of mouth open, surprised. And the funny story was, when I first got it, I kind of figured it would be a drama episode, because a lot of the X-Files episodes are. I knew it was Monster of the Week, but I didn't know it was going to be as comedic as it was. And so I'm thinking, wow, I'm stressing out, going, wow, I've got really going to have to act here. I can't rest on my laurels of my comedic improv skills, which I couldn't, by the way, anyway, because the writing was so bang on and perfect. I had to do it, and I got there, and I sort of acted in such a way that I thought would be appropriate for this weremonster. After all, he was a reptilian to begin with, and didn't know much of the human ways. How would he talk? How would his words come out? And I made him quite serious, and then Darren said, no, just come on, be the Rhys Darby, be funny. And so I relaxed a little bit. It's hard to relax when you're in a graveyard with Duchovny doing a scene in X-Files. All you're doing is sweating, thinking, why am I in this world? Is this a dream? I'm thinking of the fans. I'm thinking of this phenomenal show. And then I just close my eyes and then open them again and be the sort of the comic creation that I usually do, bearing in mind that I'm also a human for the first time. And I think that in that particular scene, I was trying to kill myself because I wanted it to end. I hated the idea of being human. And so I've got about 3 or 4 things ticking through my brain, but at the same time, I remember thinking, I've got to be funny. I've got to make Duchovny laugh. I haven't watched that since I did it, because it sometimes freaks me out watching stuff that I've done where I go, wow, how did I get that? It's freaky. And that kind of fits in with the whole zeitgeist of this strange phenomena based world that I live in.
Aliens Like Us is something that, first off, I really just I've burned through all the episodes. I really enjoy the first season, and I look forward to seeing what you guys do for the next round. And you know, there's a really interesting balance because you have the comedy, which is obviously such a perfect fit for you, and then you bring on the guests like Whitley Strieber or Nick Pope. But then you also play the contactee audio. And that can be precarious because there are some, let's face it, colorful people out there in this world, in this field. And when you have an open voicemail line, people are going to call in. Talk a little bit about that balance, but also what the threshold is for you personally, where you're just like, look, I just can't get into this. This might be a bridge too far for me personally.
It's really interesting that you should bring that up. And I think it's really important too, that we're one of the few podcasts in this world, the ufology world, that doesn't take itself too seriously, but at the same time takes the subject matter seriously. And it's a really hard one to do. But obviously, being a comedian, people are expecting me to be funny. I live by being funny. Buttons, my co-host, we have a great relationship going back 15 years. We did the Cryptid Factor for about a decade before we did this. So we've got a great relationship, and we do tackle some really interesting and sometimes scary and weird subject matter. But I think it's important to remember that humans do have a great sense of humor, and just because you're dealing with something that is not necessarily funny for the most part doesn't mean you can't be funny. And I find humor in anything, and I try and get the tone right. And what I've always thought of with this, and in particular with the 10 years training with the Cryptid Factor, is we pull people in with our humor, and we pull an audience in that may not necessarily, well, let's be honest, will definitely not be interested in cryptozoology for the most part. It's like, what is that? But I'm listening for the laughs. And then a few episodes in, people start to go, hang on, they're really taking this subject matter seriously. They believe it. And God, these guys are weird. But you know what? I'm starting to believe it as well, because when you get the guests in, and in particular with this new show, the Aliens Like Us, the guests are quite serious, but they have good personalities, and they have really good information, and they're really smart and well-read. And, when you get a great mix of people that are telling you what they believe, and they have great backgrounds, then it really starts to solidify. And then when you add the contactees, which I know is an element of true weirdness, and you can sit on the fence either way on that one. And we did that clearly, comfortably, by just letting those pieces be answer phone messages, where they actually called up and left a message. So there was no two-way, three-way conversation whereby anyone could say the wrong thing. No ridicule could come in. And so those are just dropped there for the listeners to make up their own minds what they think about it. And my other thing I'll say is that when you go into the subject matter of ufology, you have to go all the way. So you can't really have a line where you go, that's a step too far for me, because some of the strangest cases have the most weirdest things happen in them. And if you look at episode 5, we did the Pascagoula case of 1975, which has a plaque commemorating this UFO incident. And this particular story involves a UFO that has a grasping hand that comes out and picks up the victims. And that's ridiculous. But who's to say it didn't happen? Because there's a plaque there. It was one of the most believable cases. Eyewitness accounts have gone through numerous lie detectors. So that's just a good example of how bizarre and how far we have to stretch our minds to believe stuff that is not necessarily what a human would think of doing at the time. You remember, they're not necessarily human. Another case is the Rendlesham Forest case,
Right.
where the small craft lands and it has weird hieroglyphic type symbols on it, and then there is a download that goes into one of the chaps, and he writes it in his notebook, and it's pages upon pages upon pages, and then of course that is later translated, and it comes out that it's more than likely humans from the future coming back and doing research. And then you got to think, wow, does that make any sense? And then yes, it does, because one of the theories is that, of course, as Buttons keeps raving on about, is that he believes, as do some others like Michael P. Masters, who wrote the book on it, that the ETs are in fact us coming back from the future for whatever reason.
Of course, Rendlesham is a great case. I am fascinated with Roswell, even though we are 77 years after it. I had the fortune of interviewing before he passed, like Stan Friedman. I had done some events with him,
Wow.
or Jesse Marcel Jr. But do you think that we're too caught up in the past, these, half a decade and more ago, of some of this phenomenon, that we should be maybe focusing on more current cases, especially when everyone is documenting footage? They're walking around with a computer in their pockets. Should we be focusing more on the now and moving past a little bit of half century ago?
Absolutely. I think those cases are so well read, so well documented, but for years there hasn't been any further breakthroughs on them. And so if there isn't now, will there ever be? And I think people like to use that heavy baggage of the past to try and prove that in this day and age these things are definitely real and happening. I think we're at the point now where we know they're real, and we know they're happening, and we know that they're not us, at least not us from the future, who knows, but we know they're not us from now. And, or at least a lot of them aren't. They're still the case is still out there that there's highly top secret craft that particularly the US have through back engineering that are up there. And I believe there's definitely a mixture of that, along with ET craft that isn't from here at all. I think we're slowly shifting. We've definitely turned a corner with these US Navy videos that have been released, proving that these things are real, turning the corner on the terminology, which I don't think will ever be fully cornered. Well, actually, it will be cornered and focused on, and then pulled back upon, and then agreed upon. UFO is just a cooler term, but UAP, yep, fine. Let's call them that now.
It's never going to catch on, Rhys.
It's not.
It's like, what's the expression from Mean Girls? Stop trying to make UAP happen. It's just going to be UFOs.
Yeah, but it's so interesting that they've done that, because phenomena rather than objects, it makes you think that it could be some natural occurrence, could be something in the sky that isn't a metallic object. And I think that's one of the purposes of it. But putting that aside, I think, once we get through this ridiculous year and we can all get back to normal, I think the next phase will be focusing on, and also, by the way, the Space Force is happening. That's this time next year, when they're going to be admitting and showing us, I think, what they've actually got in terms of spacecraft. The secret space program will be revealed to a certain extent, and they'll suddenly say, oh, we've got these things now that we're going to be flying up in the sky with, and we'll see them, and they'll be triangular craft or something like that. I firmly believe that this is a sort of a slow leak on the SSP with this Space Force situation. And then the next step will be, Oh yeah, look, I know there are ETs up there, and we're working with them. We've just started it, even though though they've probably been doing it for years. It's really exciting. It's a really exciting field to be part of, and yeah. Back to you.
I was a big fan of John Keel early on, and I continue to be a big fan of his writing, just because for me he's sort of weirdly tied. He ties all the weirdness, all the Fortean weirdness together. The cryptids, the ghosts, the aliens, the MIB. It's all and maybe extraterrestrial or extra dimensional or ultra terrestrial. I mean, what's your thought about that? Having also done the cryptid factor, how does that fit for you? Do you kind of say, okay, I know you're maybe not necessarily on board with unicorns, but are you like saying like, okay, look, maybe ghosts and and Sasquatch and aliens all exist in different layers, or how do you kind of mesh all of it together on a personal level, or as a sort of an enthusiast?
Yeah, it's a big world. The paranormal world. There's many factions or sanctions. There's many drawers to open. And I think, like I was saying before, if you're going to go into this with ufology, you've got to go all the way. And I believe that, yes, they are all connected. Some of them aren't real. Unicorns is a stretch.
You're going to get letters from the Unicorn Line.
The Unicorn Association. How dare you? But I think it makes total sense that, especially with the cryptids, that they come from somewhere else, or they're hiding underneath the earth, or they come from another dimension. Along with Keel, I do believe that they're linked, because there's so many eyewitness accounts of creatures that aren't just greys, that aren't just insectoids, that there's, big owl creatures with giant red eyes. There's many other cryptid sightings that correlate with UFO appearances in those areas. So for me, it just makes sense. Now, the real question is, are they interdimensional, or are they coming from our own dimension but far away? And I think I'm definitely leaning towards interdimensional. I believe there's definitely a lot of different universes. The way of getting through them has got to be some sort of either craft or opening, some sort of key to get through, and that's one of the things that excites me about the possible existence of Sasquatches, is that they can come through from another world, because otherwise we would have caught something. We would have caught something more than just on camera or on video from a distance in a blur. It's so frustrating, isn't it? Especially that the cryptid world is the most frustrating, because you're just dealing with blurry photographs and people going, what, a walking lizard? Are you nuts? And so it's kind of like, well, no, but can't you just like, if I was one of these billionaires, I would fill the Sierra forest with drone cameras, very quiet ones. I would send in a special forces unit. They just become part of nature. And they would be in there with little special intel cameras and stuff, all the latest gadgets that don't make noises, and just comb the whole area. I know that they tried to do that with Loch Ness. They tried to basically comb it with boats on the top and things dangling down. They had submarines, and still nothing was found. Now, I believe Loch Ness is the monster is probably a giant eel, or a number of giant eels that are seen now and again breaking the surface. It's definitely not an old dinosaur, that's for sure.
Do you have a ghost story? Do you have a Sasquatch story, or a cryptid story, or a UFO story? I mean, yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, I'm out of all the paranormal stuff, ghosts I'm least interested in. But yes, I do have a couple of ghost stories. cryptid stories, really just looking for stuff. My wife saw an alien big cat. I didn't get to. We were looking for, we're on an expedition to look for thunderbirds at the time. And knowing full well we wouldn't see any, but it was for a Cryptid Factor pilot. And my wife actually saw a black panther, at least the tail end of it, with her friend. And it's I think we actually interviewed her for the Cryptid Factor. One of the weird things about that sighting from her was that she almost instantly forgot about it. And that always, to this day, freaks me out, wondering whether there's some sort of ESP that comes through when you, like an MIB situation, but when you see something that it kind of, something happens that they try to make you forget. And we quickly interviewed her, and then she spoke of it. And I remember her saying, after seeing it, there was a whole day when she went, she didn't even think about it. And I was like, we're on an expedition to look for cryptids, and you found something and you forgot to tell me? It was so weird. So yeah, I've been to Loch Ness 3 times, and that's where I saw UFOs. So I have seen UFOs, but only in astral level, so way up in space. And I've also seen them when I've done contact in the desert, both times using night vision goggles, which if you're into UFOs, you've got to invest in that situation, because you can look up at the stars at night, and especially out in the desert, and you're guaranteed to see anomalies. And as soon as I put them up the last time I was out there, maybe I was willing. I like to think I willed one to turn up, but I just put them up, and then into the frame of the night vision goggles, this craft came in. This is up in space. It was a light, and it came in, and there's other stars and stuff around it, but this one moved in and then did a crazy turn, almost like an S turn that was completely unnatural, and then darted away at really extraordinary speed. And I said to myself and those around me, that was a UFO showing off for me right then.
Is there anything else that you would like to cover? Anything that we've not touched on?
No. I'll just say that Aliens Like Us, this first season, has been about people dipping their toes in on the subject matter. It's about people seeing that Buttons and I and Ethan have good senses of humor. We're regular people. We're not bonkers. I'm a little bit bonkers maybe, but it's about opening up those doors and having some really interesting truths come through. And I hope in the next season we hone in a bit more on cases and look towards the future, as we've discussed in this interview. Not so much holding on to the past that's been explored so much, but really sort of using news and technology. What are the avenues that we're going to take to get to the truth, get to disclosure faster, much faster than is happening right now?
Thanks, man. Keep up the good work, and thanks for your time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Like the sound of this video? All of our music was licensed from Soundstripe, a subscription-based royalty-free music library for filmmakers, podcasters, YouTubers, and more. Soundstripe. Keep creating.